Hey people, Freeman here, Trish, whichever. I'll figure out that name thing one day. I want to talk about something a little different today. I want to talk about racism. What is racism? What isn't racism? How is that tying into this taking a knee in NFL? And what can you do about it? How can we maybe operate a little bit different in society? So what racism is, and it's really simple. Like, I think sometimes we make things a little bit more confusing than we need to. Racism is very simply prejudice plus power. That's it. That's what racism is. That's why you can't have reverse racism, because not everybody shares power equally. So some examples of that. So prejudice, for instance. Let's talk prejudice. Prejudice is very simply judgment that you have internalized, that you have decided is real for you. And as we all know, judgments change over time, so prejudices obviously change over time. Now, prejudices get reinforced in various ways in society. They get reinforced through our parents as we're growing up, through our friends, through our teachers, what we read, the media, radio shows, podcasts, everything else. There's always judgments. We're human. We have judgments. Like, that's having judgments is actually very normal, and no one is exempt from that. Everybody has judgments. Everybody has prejudice, and anyone that says that they're exempt from prejudice is bullshit. They're lying. Everybody has it. So when I hear things like reverse racism, when you're talking about like, oh, that black person is being racist, really what you're saying is that black person has prejudice. And yeah, fuck yeah, of course they do. Everybody does. But the reason that they're not racist is because they don't have power. And racism is prejudice plus power. Power is the key component, people. And the reason that not everybody, like, you could argue with me and say, oh, well, everybody has power equally. Well, think about it for a second. This country that we live in, so I'm in Canada. Many of you that are going to watch this are in Canada. Some will be from the States. But really, the two nations are essentially very similar, right? Who settled North America? Was it the indigenous people? No, they were already here, so they didn't come in and conquer it, right? So yeah, they settled it at one point in time, and their ways of being ran the world. But then the white Europeans came in and conquered the land and committed all of the atrocities and decimated the indigenous populations and put them on reserves and did all of these different things, but brought in with all of that white European structures. So corporate structures, banking structures, how we govern, all of those structures came from white Europeans. Now, that isn't the normal in the world, because believe it or not, there are more countries in the world than just European countries, and there are more people in the world than just white people. Did you know actually that white people are actually, like, I don't know what the actual percentage is, but it's like 10 to 20% of the world population is actually white. It might even be less than that. I'm not exactly sure. Did you know that the majority of the world population is non-white? Like, isn't that something to think about, right? So there's a lot of countries in the world and a lot of cultures in the world, and all of those cultures have their own structures. The African tribe that maybe lives in the Congo, they have completely different structures on how their society runs, and how they govern themselves and how they pray and how they survive and keep their society running. The Indian culture, like I'm talking like India, they have their own structures, right? Afghani culture has their own structures. Like, there's structures all over the world, societal structures, that are completely different than European structures. Now, some people will say, well, okay, we came in and we conquered the land, so our structures get to be in place. Well, number one, again, that's power. So you're admitting that we have power in North America, like white Europeans do. So number one, like, just by that argument, you're admitting that we have power. But number two, just because we conquered North America, that doesn't make it right. You know, just because that African tribe didn't go and conquer the rest of the world, that doesn't make them weaker. That just means that they had no desire to go and conquer the rest of the world and be murderous assholes all across the fucking globe. That's all it means, that they just didn't do it, and we did. You know, it doesn't make the Europeans better. The only thing it makes the Europeans better at is being militant fucking assholes, ultimately, right? You know, and don't get me wrong, like, I don't hate my heritage. I love my heritage. I have a lot of pride in my heritage. But my pride in my heritage shouldn't overshadow someone else's heritage, right? It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. You know, you can love who you are and love where you come from. I do. I love who I am. I love where I come from. But it doesn't make me better than anybody else. It doesn't make my way of being better than anyone else's. And I think that's what really kills me in a lot of these conversations, is as soon as someone says, I know better than you, as soon as someone says, I don't believe what you're saying, I know better, that's power. That is, you're feeling entitled that your opinion matters more than your neighbor's opinion, or that person that you're talking to's opinion. Like, do you get that? As soon as you say, I know better than you, that's power. Like, that's what it is. And if we want to make some changes in the world, the very first thing we need to do is just start believing people's experiences. You know, and that wasn't always, like, I was guilty of not doing that before. I was guilty of not believing the experiences of my wife. I was guilty of not believing the experiences of other cultures and other ways of being. I was guilty of a lot of things because I thought I knew better. But I was also raised in a society that reinforced how I felt, right? So being white, European, middle class, and everything around me in my life reinforced my way of being. So I had no reason to think that my way of being was wrong, you know? And it wasn't until I transitioned, and I've told this story in other videos, but just as a quick recap, when I transitioned, you know, I went from a male experience to a female experience. I was treated different, and very noticeably different in many different ways. So much so that it really helped me take my blinders off to the world. And I held, you know, there's like different prejudices that I held before that I don't hold now because my blinders came off, because I started consciously asking questions and actually listening to people and believing their experiences. You know, like a really simple one is, I grew up with the belief that, you know, most natives were alcoholics, right? And while maybe there might be some statistics that support that there is more alcoholism in the native, the indigenous ethnicity, as opposed to, like, you know, maybe the white European ethnicity, maybe there's more alcoholism in indigenous people. Maybe that is a real stat. I don't exactly know. But we can't just look at it through the lens of, oh, it was just their choice, right? There's a lot more that's been going on. You know, if I look at myself and compare myself to maybe someone else my age, so I'm, you know, just over 40 years old, and the last residential school closed down think in the 90s, I believe. I could be wrong on some of these things, so don't quote me on these. But there could be, very conceivably be, an Indigenous gentleman, same age as me, that grew up in a residential school. Now we all have technically the same cap. Like, we all have the same ability in life. We're all humans. We all want love. We all want connection. We all have hopes and dreams. We all have ultimately the same place that we could achieve to. Really, right? We all have that same potential. So when someone says, "Oh yeah, we all have that same potential," yes, we do, but we don't start from the same place. So you take that Indigenous gentleman and myself, and you compare us side by side. Growing up, I had my family around. He may have had his family stripped. He may have been stripped away from his parents and sent to residential school. Oh, all of a sudden, he's starting, that little bit lower. And then, I was always, well fed, well nourished. Maybe he wasn't. I had a lot of loving people around me. My parents, my family, friends. Maybe he was abused and beaten by the church that ran, the residential school. I never had to deal with things like alcoholism or anything nothing that directly affected me. Maybe all of, like so many people in his life, because of these other factors, he had to deal with that. So just by those few examples, all of a sudden there's this gap, right? He started here and I started here in life. And that's what we really need to pay attention to is, yes, we all have the same potential in life, but we don't start all from the same place. We're not all born in the same spot, and that's the difference, right? We're not all born with white skin that fits into a white society. We're not all born with all of our physical and mental abilities. There are people that are born, with pieces of limbs missing, or have degenerative diseases, or have, mental incapacities. Like, we're not all born in the same spot, right? Do we get that? Do you understand that? So there are those differences, and we have to acknowledge those. And that's why it's like when someone says, "Oh, I don't see color, everybody is the same," that's one of the worst things that you can say to somebody. Because if I say to my friend who's a person of color, and I say, "Oh, I just don't see color," just by saying that, I'm flatlining the world. And I'm flatlining the world from my perspective, from my eyes, from my viewpoint, right? And by doing that, I'm just erasing their identity and their existence in many ways. So the best thing that you can do is to say, yeah, I see difference. I see that you are different than me, I see that you're a person of color. I recognize that our experiences are different. I recognize that I have more privilege in certain spaces than you do, or in many spaces maybe. I recognize that many of the structures that we both have to live in fit better for me than they do for you, And it's, none of this is about any of us feeling bad about who we are, I don't want people to be like, "Oh, we said this, now it's like I feel bad about myself because I have privilege." You don't feel bad because you have privilege. You're born the way you're born. We are who we are. But we just need to just really recognize that that there is a difference, and we just need to recognize when you have more or someone else has less, and that it's okay to maybe take a step back. It's okay, not even okay, it's necessary to listen to what they have to say. When they say, "This is my experience in the world, and this is how I see the world," then listen to them. How does it hurt to listen to their experience and to believe their experience. The best thing that you can ever do for a person ever is to just believe them. Because believing someone is acknowledging them. It's acknowledging them down to their soul. It's like, I see you. So believe people when they talk. What reason do we have not to? I can't say that their experience is different than what they're telling me. I'm not living their life. I have no reason to think otherwise. And for me to even pretend to know their experience better than I do just makes me an entitled asshole, honestly. Like, that's what it is. So when we're looking at all of these things, like, with the NFL lately, and Trump and all his bullshit, and Colin Kaepernick protested for something that he felt was necessary. He is seeing ever increasing police violence against Black people in the United States. And not just that, but like a whole myriad of violences and offenses. And he decided to use his privilege as a football player and his exposure to protest. So he started taking a knee. And how much nicer of a protest could he do than just taking a silent knee during a football game? But instead, people all over the place fucking attacked him like crazy. He ended up, they ruined his career, these owners. Essentially ruined his career. And for what? Just because he's deciding to protest? Sure, you might say, oh, well, what about respect to the soldiers? Right, okay, let's talk about respect to the soldiers. So, what do our soldiers do? Why are they out there fighting? So, and let's just talk about, we'll focus more on like World War I and World War II, where they're out there fighting for our rights and freedoms, right? Because, like, let's be honest, a lot of the wars lately, they're fucking corporate wars, and I don't even want to go into that. But I don't support those wars. I support the soldiers. I support the people doing their jobs, who are being sent there. I have family and I have friends that are military, and I want them home safe. I want them healthy. I want them to come back to their families. I want them to be treated well and respected well when they're back here, for their efforts and the work that they're doing. But we got to remember, what are they fighting for ultimately? They're fighting for our fundamental rights. And our fundamental rights include the right to protest, include freedom of choice, include freedom of press, those types of things. And if we're not going to hold those things in high regard, then why are we sending our citizens overseas and getting them killed all the time? Why do we even have a military? The best way, honestly, the best way that we can honor our military and our soldiers is by exercising our fundamental freedoms and our fundamental rights. Bar none, because that's why they're doing their job. So don't tell me that by protesting, it's disrespecting the soldiers. By not protesting, by bowing down to fascism, that's disrespecting their efforts. Everybody has these fundamental rights. And we need to exercise them. And we need to support each other in exercising them. And that's the way, that's what we need to do. We're no different. We all need to, we all have differences of opinions. We have different ways of living our lives. We have different political views. But ultimately, we all need the same things. We all want connection and love and togetherness. We want to make sure our families are healthy and happy and fed, and our kids are like raised in good environments. And we need to support each other in that, and stop creating these dividing lines. These dividing lines that are being put between us are there on purpose. I kid you not. Make no mistake. Like that shit is manufactured. You think the reason that we're all having political fights all the time on Facebook and different things is just because we have different political views? It's not just that. All that stuff is being manufactured because it's easier when people are divided amongst themselves. It is easier to conquer them and keep them all at bay. Because the power, the real power, is all of us together. And if we were to ever wake up and realize that together we all have the power, all of the 1%ers of the world would be fucking terrified. Because that's the real truth in all of this. So we can keep fighting all we want, but realize that we're fighting at our own peril. And that's exactly what they all want us to do. So when someone protests, support them in their protest. And my hat goes off to like the Colin Kaepernicks of the world, Black Lives Matter, anyone else who has the guts to stand up for what they feel is right and protest, because that is their fundamental right to do so, and we need to be supportive of that. Now I will say with these owners, I'm glad that people, these football teams and stuff, took a knee this last weekend, and the owners and stuff, but there is another point to that we need to, I think, address. And that point is those very owners that destroyed Colin Kaepernick's career for protesting for something that was real and that he firmly believed in, that he supported actually with his own money in many other ways, they ruined his career. But now they're all of a sudden being told what they can and can't do with their business by Mr. T. Rump, now they decide they want to protest. Now they would decide that they want to stand up. Again, I'm glad that that right is being exercised and they're standing against fascism. But let's think about what those guys are standing up for. They're standing up for their pocketbook, right? And again, while I support their protest, let's compare their protest to Colin Kaepernick's protest. Night and day. So that's all I got to say. Rant over. Let's get along. It's okay. Love you all.